The Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders, especially by officials of a coordinate branch who have sworn an oath to uphold it. To permit such officials to freely annul the judgments of the courts of the United States would not just destroy the rights acquired under those judgments, it would make a solemn mockery of the Constitution itself. Defendants provide no convincing reason to avoid the conclusion that appears obvious. They deliberately flouted this court's order. Rather than offer a mea culpa and attempt to explain this grave error and detail plans to rectify it, defendants offer various imaginative arguments for why they nevertheless technically complied with the order. None of their positions withstand scrutiny. Defendants' conduct, moreover, manifests a willful disregard of the court's legally binding prescriptions. Given the evidence at this early stage in the inquiry and offered no persuasive reason to conclude otherwise, the court finds that there is probable cause that defendants acted contemptuously. When the judge says acted contemptuously, he means in a legal sense, as in the defendants acted in contempt of court.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast again. A federal judge has issued a devastating ruling that strips away the core powers of the presidency, freezing Trump's assets, upholding fraud penalties in full, declaring National Guard deployments illegal, and systematically rejecting immunity claims and procedural maneuvers. The sweeping decision, with criminal contempt referrals that could lead to jail, fundamentally changes everything about presidential power and legal accountability in the Trump era. But this time, something was different. This time, the judge had clearly reached the end of her patience with Trump's tactics. And what followed was a systematic dismantling of every single argument Trump's lawyers could muster. One by one, their appeals were rejected. One by one, their immunity claims were swept aside. One by one, their privilege assertions were pierced.
If you want to know where contempt of court is on the map of the death of the Republic, it's that thing right on the edge of the abyss. You get up to you're approaching the cliff, there's the signs telling you you're getting close to the edge, and then you go past the signs and then you get right up to the edge. It's the contempt of court that's right there. When the Trump administration started shipping people off to a foreign prison in El Salvador, a judge in Washington ordered them to turn around the planes that were in the air at that moment flying to that prison. The administration did not do that. Instead, they sent those people to that prison in El Salvador anyway. Ever since, that same federal judge in Washington has been demanding answers about who exactly made the decision to defy his legally binding order, and when, and how, and who else is implicated in this mess. Today, in this ruling, that Washington judge made clear that he is done playing games. They are on the edge of contempt, which is on the edge of the end. He gave the Trump administration until Wednesday, next week, 1 week, to either fix this mess by having the U.S. government retake custody of all those people it shipped to El Salvador, or start handing over the names of Trump officials for the judge to hold in criminal contempt.
The judge's language was devastating, describing Trump's conduct as flagrant disregard for the law and the Constitution, which is about as harsh as judicial language gets. And here's what makes this ruling so genuinely unprecedented. The judge didn't just rule against Trump on some narrow legal issue. She didn't just impose some modest sanctions that Trump could appeal and delay for years. She authorized immediate asset seizure. She upheld full fraud penalties. She made contempt referrals that moved Trump directly toward criminal sentencing. She declared Trump's National Guard deployments illegal. She blocked Trump's attempt to claim over $1 billion in settlements that he was trying to use to offset what he owes. Think about what that means in practical terms. Trump has spent his entire adult life building an identity around wealth and power. He's the guy who never pays what he owes.
After the planes didn't turn around and landed in El Salvador, the president of that country mocked the judge's order by tweeting, quote, "Oopsie, too late." He literally used the word oopsie. That was then reposted by America's Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Well, today, the judge in that case wrote that there's probable cause for contempt charges against Trump administration officials. He cited that instance specifically. Quote, "Boasts by defendants intimated that they had defied the court's order deliberately and gleefully. The Secretary of State, for instance, retweeted a post in which, above a news headline noting this court's order to return the flights to the U.S., the president of El Salvador wrote, oopsie, too late." Life comes at you fast, Marco Rubio. Joining us now is Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project and the lead attorney in this case against the administration. Mr. Gallant, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I appreciate it. This is one of those rulings from a federal judge that gets read on nightly news shows because it is narrative and it is written in a way that is designed to make clear to all people, not just lawyers, how serious the stakes are here and how badly, in this judge's estimation, the administration has messed up on something very serious. What's your reaction to this ruling, and what do you think it will mean for this case?
Who always finds a way to negotiate down, delay, avoid, or just flat out refuse to accept accountability. And now, a federal judge has essentially said, that's over. No more delays, no more games, no more pretending that the rules don't apply to you. Pay what you owe. Face the consequences. Comply with court orders or go to jail. The asset freeze alone is absolutely devastating. When the judge authorized immediate asset seizure, she effectively cut off Trump's access to the money he needs to fund his legal defense, to maintain his businesses, to support his lifestyle. And for someone like Trump, whose entire sense of self is wrapped up in being rich and powerful, having your wealth literally taken from you by federal marshals is about as psychologically devastating as it gets. This isn't just a financial penalty, it's a fundamental attack on his identity. But the asset freeze is just the beginning. The criminal contempt referrals mean that prosecutors can now move forward with charging Trump for defying court orders.
Yeah, a few things. I mean, first of all, your introduction, I think, hit it right. This is serious business, and we're in a very serious place. And I think you're right about the way the judge wrote it. I think he's writing for more than just the lawyers, more than just law professors. He's trying to talk to the American public about what it would mean if court orders are violated. And I think the other thing he said, which is really important, is because I've been sitting there in court, obviously, for all these hearings, is he has given the government time and time again the opportunity to explain themselves, and they've simply refused. The most important thing from our standpoint is I'm going to let other people get into whether we're at a constitutional crisis now or approaching it and what it means for the rule of law in a larger sense. The most important thing for me today was that the court said, look, they can still get out from under this if they do the right thing and bring these men back. And obviously everyone's focused on Kilmer right now, and that's critically important that he be brought back. But in our case, there were hundreds of Venezuelan men who were wrongfully sent to this prison and are there now.
And this isn't just some theoretical possibility. The judge issued warnings of immediate arrest for contempt, meaning that if Trump continues his pattern of obstruction and defiance, he could be taken into custody without further warning. We're talking about a sitting president potentially being arrested by federal marshals in his own White House. And the emergency reviews that are now happening among Trump's aides, cabinet officials, and members of Congress show that everyone in Washington understands just how serious this is. These aren't routine planning sessions. These are emergency scrambles to figure out what happens next when the President of the United States has been rendered essentially unable to function. People are gaming out scenarios for resignation, for 25th Amendment removal, for impeachment votes. When that kind of planning starts happening, it means the political establishment has concluded that Trump's position has become fundamentally untenable. The legal and political analysts who have been following this case agree that this ruling represents the final blow for Trump. He has no viable legal defenses left. Every appeal has been exhausted. Every immunity claim has been eliminated.
And I think Judge Boasberg's saying, look, as bad as this was, I don't need to go through with all this if you just do the right thing and bring these men back. Unfortunately, the government has already appealed his order. His order came out this afternoon. They've already appealed it rather than saying, okay, we'll do the right thing and bring these men back.
And to be clearly, what the judge is signaling here is that the Trump administration does not need to set all of these people free or release them or do any other specific thing. The judge is simply saying that these men must be brought back into the custody of the United States, that they must be under the control and custody of the United States so that the proceedings on any number of their cases can proceed along the lines that are afforded under the Constitution, right? He's not telling the administration that they need to do any one thing with any of these men other than put them back under U.S. control.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Rachel. That's absolutely right. The judge has gone out of his way to make clear
Every privilege assertion has been pierced. He's facing asset seizures, criminal contempt, potential imprisonment, and the complete collapse of his ability to govern effectively. And all of this happened in a single court session, a rapid succession of rejections that left Trump's legal team reeling. Now let's talk about what this ruling actually means for the balance of power between the executive and judicial branches, because this is where things get really interesting from a constitutional perspective. When a federal judge essentially says that a sitting president has no immunity from fraud penalties, asset seizures, and contempt sanctions, it fundamentally changes the relationship between the presidency and the courts. For decades, presidents have operated with a broad understanding that they were largely immune from legal accountability while in office. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel has long held that a sitting president cannot be indicted. Courts have been reluctant to impose serious sanctions on a sitting president for fear of disrupting the functioning of the executive branch.
But Judge Ling's ruling throws all of that out the window. She's effectively saying that presidential power has real limits, that the Constitution doesn't protect the president from the consequences of fraud and obstruction, and that courts have both the authority and the obligation to hold the president accountable when he defies the law. This is a precedent that will echo for decades, constraining future presidents in ways that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years ago. And the timing of this ruling couldn't be worse for Trump. He's already facing mounting political pressure, with his approval ratings among independents in the gutter and key states like Ohio starting to turn against him. Now he's got this legal nightmare on top of everything else, a ruling that effectively paralyzes his administration and leaves him scrambling for survival. His aides and cabinet members are reportedly in a state of panic, trying to figure out how to manage a president who can't access his own money and who's facing potential arrest. The fact that the judge used language like flagrant disregard for the law and the Constitution tells you this wasn't just a routine adverse ruling. This was a complete repudiation of Trump's entire approach to legal accountability. She wasn't just ruling against him on the merits, she was sending a message that his conduct has been so egregious, so defiant, so fundamentally contemptuous of judicial authority that the normal rules of procedure and deference don't apply anymore. And this is the moment that legal experts have been warning about for years. Trump has spent decades avoiding accountability through a combination of wealth, power, and procedural gamesmanship. He's relied on the fact that suing someone rich and powerful is expensive and difficult, that courts are slow and cautious, that appeals can drag on for years, that immunity doctrines protect the powerful from the consequences of their actions. But now, all of those protections have been stripped away in a single devastating ruling. The immediate asset freezes mean that Trump can't access his wealth to pay lawyers or fund political operations or even maintain his lifestyle. And when someone's assets are frozen, they lose the ability to control their own financial affairs. That loss of autonomy is psychologically devastating for anyone, but especially for someone like Trump, whose entire identity is built around being in control and being wealthy. That was a company that made some response to this. And the authorization for criminal contempt referrals means prosecutors can now move forward with charging Trump for defying court orders, which could result in jail time much sooner than anyone expected. Normally, contempt proceedings take months or even years to resolve, with plenty of opportunities for appeal and delay. But the judge's ruling seems to have accelerated the timeline significantly, moving Trump toward immediate sentencing without further delay. The emergency reviews that aides and cabinet officials and Congress members are conducting show that people throughout the government recognize this ruling as a potential extinction-level event for the Trump administration. When even loyal supporters start gaming out scenarios for resignation or 25th Amendment removal or impeachment, that tells you the political establishment has concluded that Trump's position has become untenable. The question is no longer whether Trump faces consequences, but rather how soon and through what mechanism those consequences arrive. Let's dig into the specific findings and orders in Judge Rita Lynn's ruling, because the details are what make this so absolutely devastating for Trump. This isn't just a general ruling against him, it's a comprehensive dismantling of every legal foundation his presidency has rested on. The blocking of Trump's attempt to claim over $1 billion in settlements apparently relates to cases where Trump tried to argue that various legal settlements he reached should offset fraud penalties he owes. The judge rejected this argument, finding that the settlements were for different matters and don't reduce Trump's liability for the systematic fraud that's been proven. This is significant because Trump's lawyers had been counting on these settlement credits to substantially reduce what Trump actually has to pay. They thought they had found a clever way to avoid the full weight of the fraud judgments, and the judge essentially told them that their creative accounting doesn't work. The declaration that Trump's National Guard deployments were illegal is a huge blow to his executive authority, because it shows courts are willing to second-guess presidential military decisions when they believe those decisions exceed constitutional or statutory limits. Trump has been using National Guard forces for various purposes, including immigration enforcement and domestic security operations. And having a court declare those deployments illegal creates enormous problems both legally and operationally. It means Guard members may have been operating without proper legal authority, and actions they took could be challenged as unlawful. It also means that Trump's ability to use military forces for domestic purposes has been significantly curtailed by judicial action. The upholding of all fraud penalties means Trump is now definitely on the hook for hundreds of millions or potentially billions of dollars in judgments from various fraud cases. These aren't just proposed penalties that might be reduced on appeal, but final enforceable judgments that can be collected immediately through asset seizures and garnishments. For someone who has spent his entire career avoiding paying what he owes, having courts finally enforce full penalties represents a complete breakdown of his normal ability to delay and negotiate and avoid consequences. The system that has protected him for so long has finally caught up with him. The contempt referrals that were upheld relate to Trump's repeated defiance of court orders to produce documents, to refrain from certain conduct, and to comply with various judicial directives. Contempt of court is one of the most serious findings a judge can make because it represents direct defiance of judicial authority. The fact that multiple contempt referrals are now moving forward means Trump faces potential criminal prosecution for each instance of contempt, which could result in multiple convictions and sentences. He's not just facing one contempt charge, he's facing a series of them, each one carrying the potential for jail time. The asset seizure orders that were authorized mean federal marshals and other enforcement officers can now begin the process of taking control of Trump's properties and bank accounts and other assets to satisfy the fraud judgments. This isn't just a theoretical threat, but actual enforcement that can happen very quickly once the legal authorization is in place. Trump could literally wake up one day to find that properties have been seized and accounts have been frozen, and he no longer has access to his own wealth. The sheer speed with which this can happen is part of what makes it so devastating. He doesn't have time to move money around or hide assets. The seizure can happen before he even knows it's coming. The rejection of every appeal and procedural maneuver shows the judge was not interested in giving Trump more time or more opportunities to delay enforcement. Courts often give defendants multiple chances to comply and multiple opportunities to appeal before imposing final sanctions. But in Trump's case, the judge apparently concluded that he's had more than enough process and it's time for accountability. This kind of judicial impatience with continued delays is relatively rare, but when it happens, it usually signals that the judge believes the defendant has been playing games with the system. And Trump has been playing games with the system for so long that the judge's patience has simply run out. The elimination of immunity claims is particularly significant because Trump's lawyers have been arguing that various forms of immunity, including presidential immunity, absolute immunity, and qualified immunity, protect him from civil and criminal liability. The judge's ruling apparently sweeps away all of these immunity arguments, finding that none of them apply in the circumstances of Trump's fraud and obstruction. This creates precedent that future courts can cite when Trump or others try to assert immunity in other cases. The idea that a sitting president is immune from all legal accountability has been dealt a serious blow by this ruling. The elimination of privilege claims means Trump can no longer hide behind executive privilege or attorney-client privilege or other confidentiality protections to avoid producing evidence or testimony. Privilege claims have been one of Trump's main tools for avoiding accountability by keeping damaging information sealed or protected from disclosure. Having those privilege claims systematically rejected means prosecutors and plaintiffs will have access to evidence they've been fighting to obtain for years. The wall of secrecy that Trump has built around his activities is crumbling. Trump's outbursts and threats in court apparently included him becoming verbally aggressive toward the judge and prosecutors and potentially making statements that could be construed as threatening or intimidating. Federal judges have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior in their courtrooms because it undermines the dignity and authority of the judicial process. The fact that Trump felt entitled to behave this way, despite being in federal court, shows either extraordinary hubris or complete loss of emotional control. Either way, it didn't help his case. The warnings of immediate arrest that the judge issued mean Trump is now on notice that if he continues to defy court orders or engage in obstruction or make threats, he can be taken into custody immediately without further warning. Judges have broad authority to order immediate arrest for contempt, and when they make such warnings public, it's usually because they're very close to actually carrying them out. Trump now has to walk an extremely fine line between pursuing his legal rights and avoiding conduct that could land him in jail. He can't just keep doing what he's been doing and expect to get away with it anymore. The maximum legal sanctions that the judge referenced include not just fines and asset seizures, but potentially imprisonment for contempt and prohibition from serving as a corporate officer or director, and other restrictions that would fundamentally limit Trump's business and political activities. Maximum sanctions are reserved for the most egregious misconduct, and the fact that the judge believes they're warranted here tells you how seriously she views Trump's defiance and obstruction. She's not just slapping him on the wrist, she's looking at the most severe penalties available. The ongoing defiance and obstruction that the judge cited shows a pattern of Trump repeatedly ignoring or violating court orders over an extended period. This isn't just one isolated incident of noncompliance, but rather systematic defiance that demonstrates contempt for judicial authority. When courts see this kind of pattern, they often conclude that normal sanctions aren't sufficient and more severe measures, including incarceration, are necessary to ensure compliance. Trump's history of defying court orders has finally caught up with him. The language about flagrant disregard for law and constitution is extraordinarily harsh judicial language that you rarely see in court opinions. Judges typically try to be measured and professional, even when ruling against someone decisively. But this judge apparently felt Trump's conduct was so egregious that stronger language was warranted. This kind of harsh judicial language makes it very difficult for Trump to claim on appeal that the judge was biased or exceeded her authority because the findings are so detailed and damning. The record is clear, and it's not favorable to Trump. Now let's talk about what this ruling means for Trump's political survival and what the realistic options are for him and his administration going forward. The most immediate question is whether Trump can continue to function as president when his assets are frozen and he's facing potential immediate arrest and his core executive powers have been declared illegal by federal courts. Even if he technically remains in office, the practical ability to govern effectively may be compromised to the point where resignation or removal becomes inevitable. You can't run a country when you can't access your own money and you're facing potential imprisonment. The emergency reviews that aides and cabinet officials are conducting presumably involve gaming out various scenarios for how this plays out and what they should do to protect themselves and the government's ability to function. These kinds of emergency planning sessions typically involve lawyers and political advisors and senior officials trying to figure out the least bad options when all the choices are terrible. The fact that such reviews are happening at all tells you people inside the administration recognize the severity of the crisis. This isn't business as usual. This is crisis mode. The possible presidential resignation that's being discussed would involve Trump formally notifying Congress that he's stepping down, and Vice President J.D. Vance would immediately become president. Resignation would allow Trump to potentially negotiate better terms with prosecutors and to avoid the humiliation of being removed through impeachment or the 25th Amendment. However, resignation would also be an enormous admission of defeat that goes against everything Trump has built his identity around. He's not the kind of person who voluntarily gives up power, which is why he's resisted it despite mounting pressure. The 25th Amendment proceedings that are being mentioned as a possibility would involve Vice President Vance and a majority of the cabinet declaring that Trump is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the presidency. This has never been successfully used to remove a president against his will and would be extraordinarily controversial. However, the combination of asset freezes and contempt sanctions and threats of arrest could arguably render Trump unable to effectively serve, even if he's not physically or mentally incapacitated in the traditional sense. The argument would be that a president who can't access his own money and who's facing potential imprisonment is functionally unable to lead. The impeachment votes that Congress might hold would involve the House voting on articles of impeachment and then the Senate holding a trial to determine whether to remove Trump from office. The challenge is getting enough Republican senators to vote for removal, which requires a 2/3 majority. However, this ruling from Judge Lynn gives political cover to Republicans who might want to vote for removal because they can point to judicial findings of fraud and obstruction and defiance rather than making what looks like a purely partisan decision. The total legal collapse means Trump has essentially run out of legal strategies and arguments that have any chance of success. When every appeal is rejected and every immunity claim is eliminated and every privilege is pierced, you're left with no viable defense except hoping for jury nullification or presidential pardon. The problem is Trump can't pardon himself from state crimes or civil judgments, and jury nullification is extremely rare in white-collar fraud cases where the evidence is overwhelming. He's essentially cornered with nowhere to turn. The asset freezes create immediate practical problems because Trump needs access to money to pay lawyers and to fund his political operation and to maintain properties and businesses. When assets are frozen, defendants often have to seek court permission to access even basic living expenses, which is humiliating and restrictive. Trump's lifestyle depends on having significant liquid assets available, and losing that access will force dramatic changes in how he operates. The man who built his brand on being rich is about to find out what it's like to not have control over his own money. The move toward criminal sentencing without further delay means Trump could be facing prison time much sooner than anyone expected. Normally, there are months or years of appeals after conviction before sentencing actually occurs. But if courts are moving toward immediate sentencing, that suggests they believe Trump has exhausted his appeal rights, and it's time for him to begin serving whatever sentence is imposed. For a former president to actually go to prison would be unprecedented and would raise all sorts of practical and security questions, but the judge's ruling suggests she's not particularly concerned about those questions. The law is the law, and Trump is going to have to face the consequences. The precedents being set affect not just Trump, but all future presidents, because courts are establishing that presidential power has real limits and that presidents can be held accountable for fraud and obstruction even while in office. This represents a significant shift from the broad view of presidential immunity that has prevailed for much of American history. Whether this shift is positive or negative depends on whether you believe strong presidential accountability is worth the potential for politically motivated prosecutions. The political fallout for Trump's team means everyone who's been defending him or enabling him now has to decide whether to continue supporting him as he goes down or to distance themselves and try to salvage their own careers. Cabinet members and senior advisors are presumably looking at their own legal exposure and thinking about whether they want to be associated with someone who's been found to have flagrant disregard for law and Constitution. The incentives all point toward people abandoning Trump to save themselves. So where does this leave us as we watch Trump's administration collapse under the weight of this nightmare ruling? We have a judge who rejected every appeal and every immunity claim and every privilege assertion. We have asset freezes and contempt referrals and threats of immediate arrest. We have National Guard deployments declared illegal and fraud penalties upheld in full. We have emergency planning for resignation or 25th Amendment or impeachment. We have Trump with no viable legal defenses left. We have aides and officials scrambling to protect themselves. We have precedents being set that will constrain future presidents. And we have what appears to be the endgame of Trump's presidency playing out in real time. The nightmare ruling represents the moment when all of Trump's delay tactics and legal maneuvers finally failed, and he has to face the consequences he's been avoiding for years. Whether he resigns or is removed or somehow hangs on despite everything will be determined in the coming days and weeks, but his position has become fundamentally untenable. The judge's willingness to use such harsh language and to authorize such severe sanctions shows courts have finally lost patience with Trump's continued defiance. The stripping of presidential powers and the authorization for asset seizures and the movement toward immediate criminal sentencing all point toward an administration in its final days. The political establishment preparing for Trump's exit shows even his allies recognize the writing on the wall. This is the collapse that legal experts have been predicting for years, finally happening in compressed time as courts decide they can't wait any longer for accountability. When a federal judge essentially says that a sitting president has no immunity from fraud penalties and asset seizures and contempt sanctions, it fundamentally changes the balance of power between the executive and judicial branches in ways that will echo for decades. The stripped powers and mass civil defeat and emergency political action that this ruling has triggered make this story absolutely critical for understanding where American democracy is heading. Trump's legal team saw every argument and appeal rejected in rapid succession, with the judge citing flagrant disregard for the law and the Constitution, a complete repudiation of his entire approach to accountability. The immediate asset freezes, criminal contempt referrals, and emergency reviews across government signal that the ruling is an extinction-level event, with the question now being whether consequences arrive through resignation, 25th Amendment, or impeachment.